So the values can either be the key terms of none, which is, you're like, why do you need none? Because sometimes you have it on everything and then you want to overwrite 3 of them and put none. So that's one use of none. Normal is basically the same as none. String, you can put any string you want, like I showed you. You can actually put an image, so you can do URL. You can put a background image just like you would any other element on your page. But actually, this would be a content, except for it wouldn't be part of the DOM. So you put a URL the same as you declare a background image, but it actually would appear like a foreground. And you could put a background image on top of that. So you could put, whatever you want to do.
So as far as like background, you mentioned background image. Can you use that for spriting? Or, can you limit what's shown there, or is it just?
So I use that all the time for spriting.
Okay.
So do you guys know what sprites are? Everyone? Yep. Okay. So you have a sprite of all of these fade icons, let's say, and it's a travel site, let's say, and you have Travelocity, you have Priceline, you have Google reviews, Yelp reviews, and you want to put the icon of those different companies in. So you can either put little icon in the page, or if you don't care about IE7, because IE7 does not support generated content, and I tend not to care about IE7 because I do mostly mobile, I would put a generated content of before, and I actually wouldn't put the URL, because the URL would actually be an image. Instead, I would put a background image. So I would say that my content equals empty, my height is 16 pixels, my width is 16 pixels, I'm display inline block, so that it appears inline block, because otherwise it's just display inline, and when something's display inline, before and after by definition are inline, but in appearance. So if you want to put a width on something, you can't if it's inline, so I put inline block. And then I put the background image of my sprite, and then I say background position, -32, -64, if it's Google, and that's where the icon is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, instead of using image though, I would use a background image, and I would just use empty content. 99.9% of the time where I do generated content, it's empty. And I'll show you in a little bit more. Then we have counters, and counters are a little bit complex. I'll talk about them in a second. Open quote and close quote, and this is kind of important for quotes. The Q tag, because you want to match the language. Usually, Q is supposed to match the language of the page, because like let's say in the United States you have like the double quotes, and then if there's a quote inside the quote, it's a single quote, right? And they're curly. In French, when you have quotes, you have quotes, and then if you have a quote inside a quote, I think you have a double left arrow and double right arrow. I'm not sure. I only speak French. I don't actually know how to read it or write it, which is kind of weird. But different languages have different quotations, and so you can actually say exactly what quotes you want to use. And then you can put attribute. An attribute, I'm in the middle of writing a blog post on the attribute, because attribute is going to be greatly expanded soon. It's not well supported yet, but right now you can only include in all browsers an actual attribute value pair. You put the attribute name inside there, and it will actually pull out the attribute value and present that. But you can actually do things like color, or like, let's say you do a data size. So you would put attribute data size px, and it would actually add a px at the end. So if your data size said 5, you would put pixel. It would be 5 pixels and stuff like that. So that's coming down the pipe, but is not yet supported. So attribute is actually going to be very robust. So let me go over counter. So counters, you know counters very well from ordered lists, right? They count for you. It's very simple. Ordered lists are not the only things that you can count, but other things on the page that you're counting are done with the generated content of a counter. So what you do is you create your own name for your counter. You make it up. In this case, I've used the name sections. So in my body, I reset the sections counter. Counter reset sections. And then for every H1 that has the class of section title that is inside a header, I'm very specific for some reason. I have no clue why I did that specific in this example. But before those H1s, that have the class of section title that is inside a header. I say parts and then counter sections. And so this one will actually count for me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I can tell what type of counter I want it to be as well. It doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It can actually be, I didn't mark down the attribute because I can actually say, I want snowflakes. I want to count in snowflakes. Why not? And then counter increment. If I don't include counter increment, it's always going to stay at 1. So you always increment. So I have a whole blog post on this, and it's right at the tutorial. And I wrote that 4 years ago, and I totally don't remember what it says. So, but it was accurate 4 years ago, and it's pretty much, it was an old spec then, so it's valid now. Let's just open it up. So when I told you that, that my blog is boring, like this is way too much information on counter, but it's the whole spec with all the information you could possibly want. And the browser support, apparently I did it when Safari 4 was in beta that I wrote this. But it was starting to have support, so you can pretty much be rest assured that these browsers now support it, but IE6 and IE7 never will. But IE8 did support it. So this is obviously one of those pages that I have not touched since 2009. It's a little bit old, but it does have all the instructions. It's basically my blog. I should entitle it, I read the spec so you don't have to. So let's close out that. So that is the counter. Then, so attribute. Oh, I did. Look. I actually did include it. So this is the old school. You could just include the attribute name, and this is supported everywhere since IE8. In CSS3, we've added this, and it's not fully supported yet. But you can actually put an attribute name, and then a unit, and a fallback. So here, that example that I gave would be the width would be the attribute of data count. So it's actually not, you can use the attribute, it doesn't have to be in generate content in the future. This is not well supported yet. And these are the different things you can use and a little explanation. So I'm not going to go in depth with that because it has nothing to do with generated content, but I didn't want to pull that aside in. Okay, so let's try it out. If you guys just want to play with this, this is the same thing that you saw earlier. Generate some characters. Get the hang of this. I'll give you just 2 minutes to do this. And I'll answer any questions if anyone has any questions. So.